Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. And in this episode, we are looking at President Xi Jinping's recent visit to Moscow, where it appears very clearly that this visit has several items that China wanted to explore and several messages that China and Russia collectively wanted to give to the world. Although official Chinese statements have said that the visit was about a visit for peace and to improve global governance, the Americans, who are watching this obviously very closely, have gone on to state that this is just the shot in the arm that President Putin needed at a time when he stands increasingly isolated. We have two experts who understand both Russia and China and their policies well, and we will take their views to draw a more comprehensive picture. We have with us General Dwivedi, who's also a professor and has done a lot of work on China, written extensively on the subject. He lectures on the subject in India and abroad. And we have Ambassador Malhotra, who's been our envoy in Moscow and obviously understands the Russians rather well. So Ambassador Malhotra, sir, I'll start with you. The Americans have obviously been concerned and therefore critical about this visit. And even though Beijing has insisted that Beijing was trying to push Russia into a peaceful end to the conflict and the invasion of Ukraine, the Americans have seen this visit as a kind of China-Russia combined message of defiance to the international community, and Russia's military operations would not cease just by a peace plan that Mr. Putin used that opportunity of the visit of Xi Jinping to enunciate. Your views?
Thank you, Maroof. Well, first of all, this reflects posturing on all sides, by the Americans, by the Russians and the Chinese. I do recall when Xi Jinping first became the president 10 years ago, his first visit even then was to Russia. And he was due for a visit to South Africa for the BRICS summit. And he stopped in Moscow to meet Putin. And he did that really without much preparation and in the face of opposition from the Chinese Foreign Office itself, who said this is not planned and we don't know how it will go through, etc. So this time too, he has been re-elected as president, and his first visit abroad to a first state, as it happens, is to Russia. So there's a 10-year long friendship that is underscored by this visit. And we must remember that the contemporary Russia-China entente is a very complex and a multidimensional phenomenon, as the Russian academic used to often tell me. It is not an ideology-driven one, first of all, but it reflects a growing axis of cooperation, and which is not a full-fledged military or security alliance. And this they made clear again. So the Americans saying that, this is the two countries are coming together and they're isolated, not really. But it's good for both of them to show that they have one important friend who's willing to publicly stand up and identify themselves as a friend. For Russia to show that the Chinese president has come and spent 3 days. They've had several meetings. They have signed up on important documents. Is useful even for its domestic projection and for the Chinese too in the context of Taiwan. And both of them, let us not forget, are facing the same common hostility from as a result of American foreign and security policies, which are both separately regard them as being hostile to their respective vital national interests. And both regard USA as their main strategic rival. So it makes sense that they should publicly show, and this is also part of their posturing, that, look, we have an important friend out there and we are meeting, and this is an important relationship, though neither of them wants an alliance. And that, I think, is also an important point to underline.
Right. So well put, sir. And this is obviously very clear that the Americans will read into it the way they want to read into it. And steadily, Moscow and Beijing seem to be ignoring the Americans and getting on with what they feel is more important diplomatic business. General Dwivedi, you have studied China in great deal. And one of the interesting dimensions that work out for me, that Russia and China have been looking at each other favorably for a long time. If you remember the Belt and Road Initiative also, when it was outlined and initiated by China, Mr. Putin was one of the top world leaders that was there in support, as well as when China celebrated the 70 years of the Chinese Communist Party's rule in China. Again, Putin was there. Why is it that China and Russia, despite a need for dependence on each other, do not have the kind of trade numbers, the kind of trade that India has with China, for instance? India's trade with China is in excess of $70 billion, whereas China and Russia's trade, from what I understand, is no more than collectively about $35 billion. So is trade not bringing them together? Then what are their geostrategic compulsions?
Well, Maroof, firstly, always a pleasure to be on your show. And the topic is very important. Well, let me first start that this visit is of enormous significance and had well laid out agenda, both for the bilateral consumption as also for the larger political global polity. So let me first start that these two countries, especially China, has a very historical and negative relation with Russia. And today, they are together because of the national interest. Otherwise, frankly speaking, there's no love lost between them. And the national interest coincide in a number of ways. First and foremost, they are on the same page because they are defying the American-driven global order, which is not acceptable to neither Putin nor Xi Jinping. Because Putin has a delusion of the Cold War, symmetry, and Xi Jinping with his China dream, rejuvenation, and China playing a greater role in its just come out 24 character guidelines. So therefore, that is the first point of convergence, that they both want to remake the global order. In fact, Xi Jinping wants to demolish the current global order and set a Sino-centric global order. Secondly, they are coming together again is also because of the very converging national interests, because China is facing America, whether you take it in the Western Pacific, you take it today globally, because China also sees America as number one challenge, and so also Russia. Secondly, their relations have grown over large period of last couple of years from a, what they call it now, no limit partnership to very tight embrace. And this visit actually is pointing to that. You pointed about the trade. The trade has taken a different turn now altogether, especially after the energy supply lines have got realigned. This trade now, if you see the latest figure of $190 billion, because Chinese 17 to 18% of energy is coming from Russia. Second is that very important factor is the technology, which is so much China is dependent upon Russia, especially defense technology. All their weapon system basically have the origin toward Russia. So the point I'm trying to make is that this visit has enormous significance. It is to express solidarity with Russia and to give a very clear message to the West that if they keep pumping the arms, the Chinese are with Russians. And you see the communique, very important statement. He has tweaked his stance. Once he was talking about the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and in latest communique, he is talking about the concern of a nation, security concerns, well pointing out that Russia has a security concern, and therefore the Chinese are appreciative of that. And secondly, in the communique, they have come out very heavily on against the Indo-Pacific, and they are trying to pitch for the Asia-Pacific security. Maroof.
Okay. Well put, sir. Very comprehensive. We will look at some of these issues once again after a break, since time is limited. And it's very clear that the Chinese are in a rather defiant mood. Just like Mr. Putin is on the ground, the Chinese are diplomatically in a defiant mood. And the Americans are obviously trying to handle the Chinese differently in the Pacific and the Russians in Europe. But more of that after a break, when we come back to look at what are the issues that are of gain to China and Russia, both in the geostrategic sense and on a one-on-one trade basis. But that after a break. Welcome back. We continue to have our two distinguished guests with us, and we are looking at the new engagement between China and Russia. And could this mean an alliance? Could this mean a meeting of two powerful countries as a rebuff to the US-led European community and the US-led concert of democracies, if I may call it as such, taking a term from World War I. But Ambassador Malhotra, sir, the Chinese have very clearly made it known to the world that they are going to need Russian state-of-the-art weaponry to strengthen some of their own military agenda. At the same time, the Russians are also using Chinese supplies, it is alleged, in the Ukraine conflict, though China has denied that. But there is evidence that is coming up again and again about how Chinese shipments are crucial for Russia to help it carry on with its campaign in Ukraine because its defense industrial base is stretched. This has implications for India. News has just come in that because of the slowdown of supplies, India is unlikely in the near future to take 2 out of the 5 S-400 systems and therefore reduce its engagement with Russia from 80,000 crores to about 50,000 crores because money saved there could be put into more urgent requirements elsewhere. So Russia's defense industrial base is clearly suffering, but it doesn't mean that Russia is finished as a military entity. And the Chinese, on the other hand, are looking at Russian support in various areas, such as Russia and China trying to carve out a new narrative in the international space. Your views?
Well, first of all, I would like to state that, there's a lot of disinformation out there, and we should be careful what all we absorb, because much of what we are exposed to is West originating disinformation.
True. Very
and
true.
There's also some coming from the Russian side. Let's be very clear about that.
True.
But, I do believe the Russians have kept their powder dry. They're not fighting Ukraine. They are ready for a battle with NATO. And if you see the use of their very sophisticated missile systems, their air force, etc., these they have restrained. They have not put them out there because, if NATO were to, or the Americans in particular, were to notice a weakness, they would have got involved in this process by now with a view to reaching some conclusion. So, and the Russians have had time to prepare since 2014, like when 2013, when they knew what was happening. And let me tell you, for Putin, this is not new. nor is it a new effort by the Americans. The Americans have been trying to unseat him since 2002. So this has been going on for a long time. So he's also taken his 7 or 8 years to prepare. From 2014, now it's 9 years. And he is well organized with his defense manufacturing capabilities and lines. So, they keep saying, they've used up all their weaponry, etc. But they've got enough stock at the moment. I would doubt that they would be silly enough to do something like put it all into a battle really with the Ukrainians. And if you see what they're doing at Bakhmut, it clearly shows their intention. They want to go there and keep battering as much Western equipment as they can. And that's what drives what they're doing. So when you look at China, so I don't believe that they would need at this moment to get anything much from China in terms of, and what they've been getting is expendable stuff like, Ukrainian, Iranian drones. So you're keeping a powder dry. You can use up all of the stuff. It doesn't cost much and off it goes. And similar stuff that they might get from elsewhere. But as regards China and providing them equipment, the Russians have always been careful because they know that situations can change and perhaps will change over time. And there are reasons also to be concerned about the relationship with China. And they have never really been so open about giving the very latest of their weaponry to the Chinese. Even the S-400, when they gave it to the Chinese after they offered it to us, and we said no at that stage, it was in a limited number, and they quantified the Chinese requirement and made sure that there would be no scope for them or make it not worthwhile from a financial viewpoint to do reverse engineering to then try and manufacture it in China. And now, as they go to more sophisticated versions of the S-400, which are already in place, then they start, and they have the countermeasures to what they're providing China. That is when they start looking at extending this to the Chinese. But at the moment, I don't see them doing it. It is not in their interest to do so. And they do realize that in a changed circumstance, they may well have a crisis with China themselves. And this is something that the Americans try and, through their academics, project quite a bit, that, things could change, and therefore there are concerns out there. And all these concepts also are American academic concepts, whether it's Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific. All these are created by American academia and then brought up here and then used as words to create differences and divisions. So one has to bear all of that in mind when one looks at the likelihood of further cooperation between Russia and China. There is important military cooperation going on. From India's viewpoint, it's certainly important, and we must continue to sound the Russians off against it because it could be used against us also. But at the same time, the Russians too have kind of a red line or limits beyond which they will not cross in their own interest, in their own national interest. Okay. And it's not because of any other country that they're doing so.
Well put, well put. I think, that's a perspective which very few people have in India, that, got to look at it from the other side of the prism. General Dwivedi, sir, it's very clear. You had mentioned in your earlier answer that China-Russia relations have historically in the past also run into rough weather. We know of the days when Mao and Khrushchev initially became close, and then the Chinese deceived them with all the transfer of weapons and other arrangements that took place. And the Russians were peeved to the extent there was also a border conflict between Russia and China. Currently, also, China is making some of the top-end military technologies. So what is driving China's agenda to get close to Russia? Is it to contest the Americans, or is it to become in itself so powerful that Xi Jinping's dream of Vision 2050 is achieved?
Well, Maroof, you have very rightly brought out that there is a historical witness between the ties of Russia and China, but because of their common interests, they have overcome that beleaguered past. Now, what China is looking at is a very clear agenda and vision set by Xi Jinping. And there's no ambiguity in that. China has to emerge as a global power by mid of the century, and only nations or only players who can spoil is America, some of its allies, and even could be India. So therefore, with a very clear-cut vision, China cannot emerge as a global player and take on America by itself, it needs allies. And the most formidable ally is Russia, because Russia also has the same agenda, because they don't accept the American-led global order. So therefore, this is one area which brings them together. Secondly is that Belt and Road Initiative, gaining global space, Eurasia is very important. And that's where Russia has a traditional hold, because these Central Asian republics were once upon a time part of Russia. So therefore, Eurasia is very important. To that extent, SCO and such like organization will help out China. Secondly is the Western Pacific. Western Pacific is going to heat up in times to come. And Russia's fleet, your Pacific fleet at Vladivostok, can play a great role. Right now it is quiet, but moment things heat up, Russians can step in again there. Third is very important is technology, because defense technology, Chinese technology still lacks credibility. They have done a lot of, jugaad, what you can say, but still they don't have that kind of technology. So they would need Russia for that technology. Beside energy, I think very important factor is that they need strong allies. And that alliance, the Russians are big players as a pillar to China. And my last point is that this partnership actually is susceptible to certain aberrations, because interests are part-time, interests are at this time coinciding, but they also could diverge, because Russia will not like to play as a junior partner to China. They like to be equal partners. Moment they find the Chinese are trying to take undue advantage, there could be some kind of friction in this alliance.
Okay. So very well put, sir. And in conclusion, I can just say that as Ambassador Malhotra brought out, we need to have a clearer perspective on what could be Russia's aim and agenda. It is certainly not what the Western press makes it out to be, and how fragile Mr. Putin or Russia is, or its military-industrial complex. The second is China has its own agenda against the world and how to seek it through Russian friendship or alliance. And thirdly, and it has been said in bits and pieces by both of you, it is an arrangement which the world needs to watch very carefully, including India, because what we are seeing now is since 2020, there are new arrangements in the world that are emerging, which will define the future world order. Thanks very much for your wisdom, and thanks to all of you for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you, Maroof. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.